I said turn around, put your hands behind your back.
On what charges, officer?
You're being detained for obstruction.
I want it on your body cam that I am Magistrate Judge Robert Franklin. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights.
A peaceful afternoon at the public library turned into a $2 million nightmare for one city when a police officer made the worst mistake of his career. The entire incident was recorded on his own body cam, capturing every word, every assumption, and every unlawful move he made. What the officer didn't know was that the black man he was harassing wasn't just any citizen. He was a magistrate judge who knew every single law the officer was about to break. And by the time the officer realized his mistake, it was already too late. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If you enjoy stories about justice being served, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and I sincerely appreciate your support. The day started like any other Saturday afternoon. Judge Robert Franklin was at the East Side Public Library with his 5-year-old granddaughter, Emma. She wore a bright pink jacket and was giggling as she flipped through a picture book about dinosaurs. Robert sat next to her at one of the small tables in the children's section, helping her sound out words she didn't recognize. He had a small backpack next to him with snacks, water bottles, and a few more books they had picked out to take home. Robert was 62 years old and had served as a magistrate judge for over 15 years. Before that, he spent 20 years as a civil rights attorney. He knew the law better than most people knew their own names. But on this particular day, he wasn't dressed in his judicial robes. He wore jeans, a simple blue sweater, and sneakers. To anyone passing by, he looked like what he was, a grandparent spending quality time with his granddaughter. Officer Kevin Schultz was driving past the library when he decided to stop in. Later, he would claim he was doing a routine community check. The truth captured on his body cam would tell a different story. Schultz had been with the police department for 8 years and had 12 complaints filed against him for racial profiling. None of those complaints had resulted in serious discipline. He felt untouchable. Schultz walked into the library. His body cam was already recording, as department policy required it to be on during all public interactions. He nodded at the librarian at the front desk and walked toward the children's section. His eyes scanned the area and landed on Robert sitting with Emma. His hand rested on his belt near his weapon. His face showed no warmth, no courtesy, just suspicion. Robert noticed the officer approaching, but didn't react. He had dealt with situations like this before, though never while babysitting his granddaughter. He continued helping Emma with her book, keeping the officer in his peripheral vision. Schultz stopped a few feet from their table. He didn't greet Robert or introduce himself properly. Instead, his first words were a question. "What are you doing here?" Robert looked up from the book. His expression stayed neutral and polite. He had trained himself over decades to never show anger or frustration in moments like this, even when every fiber of his being wanted to. "I'm reading with my granddaughter," Robert said simply, gesturing to Emma and the books spread across their table. Schultz looked at Emma, then back at Robert. His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's your granddaughter?" "Yes, she is." "Where are her parents?" Robert could have asked why that mattered. He could have asked why the officer was questioning him at all. But he knew exactly where this was going, and he decided to let it play out. Every answer he gave would be measured, legally sound, and impossible to twist. "Her mother, my daughter, is at a work conference. I'm babysitting for the weekend." Several other library patrons had started to notice the interaction. An elderly woman reading in a nearby chair looked over her glasses at them. A mother with 2 young children paused on her way to the checkout desk. Schultz shifted his weight. "Do you have any identification on you?" This was the first illegal request. Robert knew that unless an officer has reasonable suspicion that someone is involved in criminal activity, they cannot demand identification. Sitting in a library reading with a child is not criminal activity, but Robert also knew that refusing might escalate the situation with his granddaughter present. "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to go?" Schultz's jaw tightened. "I'm asking the questions here. I need to see your ID. I understand you're asking, but I'm trying to understand the legal basis for your request. Have I committed a crime? I'm conducting an investigation." "An investigation into what specific criminal activity?" The body cam captured every word of this exchange. Schultz's frustration was visible. He wasn't used to people who knew their rights, especially not black men in public spaces. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." Robert nodded slowly. "What kind of suspicious activity in a public library?" "That's not your concern. Your concern is cooperating with a police officer." "I'm happy to cooperate within the boundaries of the law, but as a citizen, I have rights. I'm sitting in a public library with my granddaughter reading books. I haven't broken any laws." The librarian had now walked over from the front desk, looking concerned. "Is everything all right here?" This is a quiet space for children. Schultz barely glanced at her. Police business. Please step back. Robert appreciated the librarian's attempt to intervene, but he could see she was uncomfortable confronting an officer. She stepped back, but didn't return to her desk. Instead, she continued watching from a few feet away. Schultz took a step closer to Robert. You're being awfully defensive for someone with nothing to hide. This was a classic manipulation tactic, and Robert recognized it immediately. The implication was that exercising your constitutional rights somehow indicated guilt. It was the kind of logic that had landed countless innocent people in handcuffs. I'm not being defensive, officer. I'm being informed about my rights. By now, Emma had noticed the tension. She stopped looking at her book and grabbed onto Robert's arm. Grandpa, why is he talking to us like that? Robert put his hand gently on her head. It's okay, sweetheart. This is a police officer. Everything is fine. Schultz looked at Emma, then back at Robert. Is there anyone who can verify that this is actually your granddaughter? Robert felt a surge of anger, but kept his voice steady. You want me to prove this child is my granddaughter? In a library? On what legal grounds? Like I said, we've had reports. Reports of what, specifically? A black man sitting with a lighter-skinned child. Is that the suspicious activity you're investigating? Emma was biracial. Her mother, Robert's daughter, was black. Her father was white. Emma had lighter skin than Robert, and her hair was curly, but not as tightly coiled as his had been in his younger years. Robert knew exactly what Schultz was implying, and he wanted it stated clearly on the body cam. Schultz didn't answer the question directly. I need you to provide identification and contact information for the child's parents. And if I refuse based on my Fourth Amendment rights, then we're going to have a problem. The elderly woman who had been watching stood up. Officer, I've been here for an hour. This man has been reading with this little girl the whole time. They're not bothering anyone. This is a library. Schultz turned to her, irritated. Ma'am, I need you to stay out of this. I'm just saying what I've observed. They've been perfectly peaceful. Ma'am, final warning. Step back. Robert looked at his granddaughter, who was now looking worried. He made a decision. He would provide his identification, but he would do so while making it clear this was under duress and not legally required. I want it stated for your body cam that I'm providing identification under protest. I do not believe there is any legal basis for this request, but I'm complying to avoid escalation in front of my granddaughter and in this public library. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He handed Schultz his driver's license. Schultz took it and looked at it. The name Robert Franklin meant nothing to him. He walked a few feet away, past the bookshelves, and spoke into his radio, running the license through the system. Robert waited patiently. Emma climbed onto his lap, and he put his arms around her. He spoke softly to her, telling her everything was okay, that sometimes police officers make mistakes, but it would all be worked out. The librarian remained nearby, now joined by another staff member. The elderly woman had pulled out her cell phone and appeared to be recording. Schultz returned with the license. The license is valid, but I still need contact information for the parents. You have my information. I've told you I'm her grandfather. What specific crime are you investigating that requires parental contact information? I could charge you with obstruction. Robert almost laughed. Obstruction required interfering with a lawful investigation. Nothing about this stop was lawful. Officer, Robert said, his voice still calm but now carrying a steel edge, obstruction of justice requires that I physically interfere with a lawful police investigation. I've answered your questions. I've provided identification under protest. I've done nothing to obstruct you. In fact, I would argue that there is no lawful investigation happening here at all. Schultz's face reddened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not with legal precision. Stand up. You're coming with me to verify your story. Am I under arrest? You're being detained for further questioning. On what probable cause? Suspicion of child endangerment. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Robert's heart pounded, but his face remained composed. Emma started to cry. The librarian gasped audibly. The elderly woman's phone was still recording. Robert spoke slowly and clearly, directly to the body cam. Officer Schultz, you are now detaining me on baseless accusations of child endangerment. There is no evidence of endangerment. This child is my granddaughter. We are reading in a public library. Your actions constitute unlawful detention and false imprisonment. Put your hands behind your back. In front of my 5-year-old granddaughter, you're going to handcuff her grandfather for reading with her. Now, Robert looked at Emma, tears streaming down her face, and made his decision. He would not resist. He would not give Schultz any excuse to escalate further. Emma, sweetheart, listen to Grandpa. I need you to be very brave right now. This officer is making a mistake, but I'm going to go with him and everything will be okay. Can you be brave for me?" Emma nodded, sobbing. The librarian rushed over. "I'll stay with her. I'll call her mother right now." Robert looked at the librarian gratefully. "Her mother's name is Jennifer Franklin, my daughter. Her number is in my phone, in my backpack." Schultz grabbed Robert's arm roughly. "Let's go." Robert stood slowly, allowing Schultz to pull his hands behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked into place. Every patron in the children's section was now watching. Several had their phones out. The mother with 2 children was comforting Emma, who was now wailing for her grandfather. As Schultz led him toward the exit, Robert spoke one more time, his voice carrying through the library. "My name is Robert Franklin. I am a magistrate judge for this county. What is happening right now is unlawful detention, false imprisonment, and a violation of my constitutional rights. I am being removed from a public library for the crime of reading with my granddaughter while black." Schultz froze mid-step. His hand tightened on Robert's arm. "What did you say?" "I said I'm a magistrate judge, Judge Robert Franklin. Perhaps you've heard of me in the courthouse where I preside over initial appearances, search warrants, and preliminary hearings. The same courthouse where you've likely testified." Schultz's face went from red to pale in seconds. His hand dropped from Robert's arm. He stepped back, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what he had just done. "You're Judge Franklin?" "I am. And every single action you've taken in the last 20 minutes has been recorded on your body camera. Every illegal demand for identification, every baseless accusation, every violation of my Fourth Amendment rights, and now, false arrest." The library had gone completely silent. Even Emma had stopped crying, sensing something important was happening. Schultz fumbled with his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need a supervisor at the East Side Library immediately." Robert stood there, still in handcuffs, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "You can remove these handcuffs now, Officer Schultz, unless you'd like to add unlawful restraint to the list of violations." Schultz's hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Robert said, rubbing his wrists. "There's been no misunderstanding. You saw a black man with a lighter-skinned child and immediately assumed criminality. You violated multiple laws and department policies. You traumatized a 5-year-old child, and you did all of it because of the color of my skin." Within minutes, Sergeant Maria Torres arrived at the library. She was a 20-year veteran, well-respected, and the moment she saw Judge Franklin, her expression showed she understood exactly how serious this was. "Judge Franklin," she said, approaching carefully, "I'm Sergeant Torres. Can you tell me what happened here? Your officer racially profiled me, demanded identification without reasonable suspicion, threatened me with arrest, and then actually detained me in front of my granddaughter. All of it is on his body camera." Torres turned to Schultz, her face hard. "Is this true?" Schultz couldn't meet her eyes. "I was investigating a report of suspicious activity." "What report?" Torres demanded. "I've been monitoring the radio all afternoon. There have been no calls to this location." Silence. Torres looked at the gathered crowd, at Emma being comforted by the librarians, at the phones still recording. "Officer Schultz, you're off duty effective immediately. Go wait in your vehicle. Do not turn off your body camera. Do not speak to anyone. I'll deal with you shortly." After Schultz left, Torres turned to Robert. "Judge Franklin, on behalf of the department, I apologize. This was completely unacceptable." "An apology doesn't undo the trauma to my granddaughter, Sergeant. An apology doesn't erase the violation of my rights." "I understand, sir. I'm going to personally ensure this is investigated thoroughly." Robert looked at Emma, now calm but exhausted in the librarian's arms. "I'm going to file a formal complaint. I'm going to request a full investigation, and I'm going to pursue legal action. Not for myself, but because if this happened to me, a judge who knows the law, imagine what happens to people who don't have my resources or knowledge." 3 days later, the body cam footage was reviewed by the police chief, the city attorney, and the mayor. The video showed everything exactly as Robert had described. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. It was a textbook case of racial profiling, unlawful detention, and abuse of authority. Officer Kevin Schultz was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation. Within 2 weeks, the investigation concluded that he had violated multiple department policies and state laws. He was terminated from the police department. But Robert wasn't finished. He filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, alleging violation of his 4th and 14th Amendment rights. He also filed a lawsuit on behalf of Emma for the emotional distress caused by witnessing her grandfather being handcuffed. The city's attorneys reviewed the body cam footage and immediately recommended settlement. There was no defense. The case was indefensible. 6 months after the incident, the city settled for $2.1 million. But Robert did something unexpected with the money. He donated the entire settlement to create the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit organization providing free legal representation to people of color who experience police misconduct. The money was never the point, Robert said at the press conference announcing the settlement. Justice was the point. Accountability was the point. Making sure this doesn't happen to others was the point. The case sparked a citywide review of police practices. Body cam policies were strengthened. All officers were required to undergo implicit bias training. A civilian oversight board was established to review complaints of racial profiling. Officer Schultz faced criminal charges for false imprisonment. He pleaded guilty to official misconduct and was sentenced to 6 months in county jail and 3 years of probation. He would never work in law enforcement again. 2 years after the library incident, Judge Robert Franklin sat in the same children's section with Emma, now 7 years old. She was reading a chapter book on her own, occasionally asking him what a word meant. The library had renamed the children's section the Justice Reading Room in honor of what happened and the changes it brought. A small plaque on the wall read, "A place where every child, regardless of race, deserves to read in peace and dignity." Emma noticed him looking at the plaque. "Grandpa, that's about what happened to us, isn't it?" "It is, sweetheart. I was really scared that day. I know you were. I was scared too. But you were so brave, and you knew all the rules." Robert smiled. "Sometimes, knowing the rules is the most powerful thing you can have. It means nobody can take advantage of you. It means you can stand up for what's right." "Will that ever happen to us again?" Robert paused. He wanted to tell her no, that the world had changed completely. But he had lived too long and seen too much to make that promise. "It might, Emma. The world isn't perfect. But what I can promise is that we'll always know our rights. We'll always stand up for what's right, and we'll always speak the truth." Emma nodded, satisfied with that answer, and returned to her book. Across the library, several families sat reading together, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all sharing the same space peacefully. The head librarian, who had witnessed everything that day, smiled at Robert. She had testified at the disciplinary hearing and in the lawsuit. Her testimony had been crucial. Robert's daughter, Jennifer, had been furious when she learned what happened, but she also expressed pride in how her father handled it. Emma had received counseling to process the trauma, and slowly she had healed. She no longer flinched when she saw police officers. She understood that one bad officer didn't represent everyone. As for the city, the changes were real and measurable. Complaints of racial profiling dropped by 67% in the 2 years following the incident. The Civilian Oversight Board had reviewed over 200 cases and recommended discipline in 43 of them. Officers knew they were being watched, and that accountability was real. Robert had also used his position on the bench to advocate for changes in how officers were trained on constitutional rights. He gave lectures at the police academy, teaching new recruits about the Fourth Amendment, probable cause, and the difference between lawful investigation and harassment. Some officers resented him. They saw him as anti-police, but many others respected him. They understood that what he was fighting for was good policing, lawful policing, policing that protected everyone's rights. At the end of their library visit, Emma checked out 5 books. Robert carried her backpack as they walked to the parking lot. A young police officer on patrol nearby saw them and nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, Judge Franklin." "Good afternoon, officer." "Have a good day, sir. And you too, young lady," he said to Emma with a warm smile. Emma waved at him. "Bye." As they drove home, Emma asked, "Grandpa, was that officer nice?" "He was respectful. And respectful is what police officers should be." "Like Officer Schultz should have been?" "Exactly like Officer Schultz should have been." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad something good came from what happened. Mom said you helped a lot of people." "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so." That evening, Robert received a call from the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund. They had just won their 15th case, representing a young black father who had been stopped 7 times in 6 months for driving suspiciously in his own neighborhood. The case had resulted in policy changes and a settlement that would help the man pay for his daughter's college education. "We couldn't have done it without your support, Judge Franklin," the attorney told him. "Keep fighting the good fight," Robert replied. As he hung up, he thought about that day in the library, the humiliation, the anger, Emma's tears, but also the strength of knowing the law, the power of standing firm, the importance of speaking truth, and most importantly, the reminder that justice isn't just about what happens to you, it's about what you do with what happens to you. Robert Franklin had turned his worst day into a catalyst for change. He had transformed a $2 million nightmare into a $2 million investment in justice, and that, in the end, was the fairest ending of all.